everyone, Mike Levin, Thursday, November 10th, 2022. On my way back from my last trip to public storage. I've emptied everything out. Woohoo! We chip away at things a little at a time in life until we achieve our goals. So much stuff that is worth doing can't be crammed into a single day, at least not without special efforts or resources, expanding your throughput. I didn't use a move truck moving back to Pennsylvania, no, back to New York from Pennsylvania, nor did I use a move truck moving to Pennsylvania from New York. Got my lovely Jeep, and with enough trips, you can move almost everything except for the biggest things you own. So I've had this principle: don't own anything that I can't transport with my Jeep. And it has paid off. Oh boy, I've been divesting myself of stuff all my life, right? We are all matter acquirers. My parents divorced, and the stuff from their house was loaded into a couple of different places, and then one dies, and then the other dies, and stuff gets dumped on me, and I don't really want it, and I don't have the time to sell it, nor the incentive. Money is not what motivates me. So lots of people are cast into their lots in life. I've talked a lot about human free will and autonomy in recent videos, and I believe that, of the things that are set, the initial conditions, there is, of course, your genetics, which is all your natural predispositions. There is innate in us the, being better or worse at math or athletics or what have you. We just have our vibe. We have our things that we're, naturally aligned to, and are, that bring joy to us or not. And it's not set in stone. Our genetic, initial conditions are just one of various factors. Of course, another big one is the circumstances in life you're born into, right? You can be, all the scientist in the world, but if you're born into a tribal society that's just scraping, doing its best to survive through hunting and gathering, you're not necessarily going to have the time to put aside to, study things. And the realities of the day suppress perhaps the value of any talents you have. And that's life, right? The two big parameters, the two big things that get randomly set at the moment that you're instantiated as a being: your genetics and your circumstances. And given the hand you're dealt, you get to a certain point where, more is under your control than ever before. Even if you're in a circumstance where you have to struggle, your darndest just to survive, you can pick up and leave. Change tribes or whatever. Strike out on your own. It's just one of those things about social beings, right? So I would imagine things that are not social creatures, things that are not, generally mammalian or at least reptilian in nature, have less and less free will as you get to simpler life forms. The likely way your life is going to play out is, more predetermined, more mathematically, predestined, precalculatable, based on how, little free will your particular life form has. And, when does free will start to come into the picture? I think it's when you have the ability to override the natural program. The natural program is like some, brightly illuminated center line on a graph, or center area on a graph. On an average distribution curve, the life you are likely to lead is the center of the bell curve, right? You got a bell curve with the average distribution of potential behaviors, and being your, 1 in a billion those people who follow the most likely path, given your genetic predispositions and your circumstances you were born into, stay generally within the center of that average distribution line. And, go west, young man, and find your future, your fortune. That kind of behavior is breaking the norm. And I think I probably would have been just on the average distribution curve. I would have been that center line sort of person had I not run into the folks of Commodore Computers. And I ran into the folks of Commodore Computers because of two particular friends, Ed Flacco and Mark Rifkin. So had it not been for Ed Flacco and Mark Rifkin, I would have not been knocked off of that center line, and I would have probably become something very mundane in the suburbs of Philadelphia. Tried to become a graphic designer for my college trade, become some small cog in the wheel of some company where, things like art and graphic designers were undervalued. And then along comes the web and art and design. I would have probably gone maybe the infographics route, fanned the flames of my drawing and illustration tendencies, and had like a little boom when infographics became the big thing. But really, I went this strange route, graphics and Commodore, graphic design and Commodore, but not a formal hardcore programmer. So I was not making the games like Psygnosis, right? I didn't end up on the PC platform, or else maybe I would have gone more of the route of the, Doom and id and Quake, type people, 3D graphics. But I got predisposed and fell in love with the ways of Commodore, and the ways of the Amiga computer in particular, and bit planes, and a whole thing for a litany of reasons were a dead-end tools. I fell in love with dead-end tools. I went off center line, brushed up to the edge of the extraordinary, right? Because people who followed their dreams to work for Commodore, Bryce Nesbitt, people like that, Carl Sassenrath, who made the Amiga their own, who took the extraordinary, right? Because it was the Atari VCS people. It was the Jay Miner and his dog Mitchie, who created the extraordinary hardware of the Atari 2600, who created the extraordinary hardware of the Amiga computer, which got acquired by Commodore, which got strangely blended with the team they brought in to take it over. Because the original, extraordinary Atari-like engineers that made the Amiga couldn't stay in suburbs of Philadelphia, right? The place I was born into by circumstance, the suburbs of Philly, was the dullening, the deadening, the taking off the edge machine that all these Commodore hardware engineers who were following their dream, not all hardware, because people like Sassenrath, they were software for sure, but people who were pushing the cutting edge were dropped into the middle of suburban Philadelphia. Worse, the boondocks, way out where, it's the stuff I love. It's nature. It's falling in love with, wineries and, quaint little artsy towns and stuff. The original suburbs of the Americas, right? So, what you're talking about is you had Philadelphia, one of the first big, great cities, ahead even of New York City. New York had a great harbor. However, the activity was in Philadelphia back in the early days. That's where the Constitution of the United States was signed, where the country was born, and there was a lot of prestige in living in Philadelphia. So those prestigious rich people in Philly didn't want to necessarily live in the city and be urban, so they created the first suburbs by creating the first railroad track into the suburbs, the main line, the R5, the R6, I forget what it actually is, but it's driving It's going west from Philadelphia, right from my alma mater, right from Drexel University, where Lancaster Pike begins. So if you drive west from West Philly, Drexel University, Lancaster Pike, and keep driving west, you follow the approximate same path as the mainline train, which was the original suburbs of Philadelphia, which is where Commodore computers ended up being. 1200 Wilson Drive, which is now a QVC, cable television channel headquarters or studio or something like that. And that's where I got my start. I miraculously went to work for Commodore Computers in the suburbs of Philadelphia, where all these extraordinary people were sort of drying up and shriveling, like, like dying zombies falling apart. And then when Commodore itself started shriveling and drying up like a zombie falling apart, those who still had the dreams of beautiful hardware scrambled and went elsewhere. Beautiful hardware and beautiful software by that point. So there was the BOS, BE, the B computer, which drew a lot of these people off. The original Amiga spirit went in some part to B. And then there was the original founder of Electronic Arts, who created a new hardware platform called 3DO, which was very Amiga-like. It was also West Coast based, and that siphoned off a bit of the dying Commodore brain trust. And then the ones who were already settled, the ones who said Brandywine and the 202 corridor from Philadelphia was their new home, and they didn't want to move. They planted roots. Well, they went to Scala Multimedia, where I ended up. So when Commodore went under, as the sysadmin at Scala would put it, the last rats jumping off the sinking ship went to Scala. And they've changed hands a number of times. And that's where I spent my my great 28 youth, right? So one of the things that happens to people, you have your innocence as a toddler up till about toddler age. As soon as you become a adolescent, you start to get wise in the ways of the world. You start to put two and two together, have a worldview, such as it were. And then you have the angst of being a teenager. And that's about when I discovered the Commodore Amiga, how much better technology could be. It's like alien tech was dropped in the middle of the world and nobody knew it. And I had my righteousness on that mission, that the whole world should be using Amigas, as crashy as they are. Surely that's a detail that will be worked out. Same with, 24-bit color, we called it back in the day. Today we just think of it as, of course, computers have lots of color. But back in those days, we were counting the number of colors computers could display, starting out at like black and white text of the old Hercules cards in an IBM. They didn't even have color. They're lucky to be able to display 40 characters across and 20 up and down. People are like, well, they're still characters, they're still graphics, aren't they? Well, not really. Specialized hardware drew characters onto the screen. From a memory standpoint, the computer only had 256 possible bits to choose from a matrix of only 80 across and 20 or 40 up and down, depending on your resolution. And that was character-based graphics, and that's where things, started out in my world. A lot of computers only had that. And when you did graphics, you went into graphics mode. It was a really weird thing. TRS-80 had that. The Coleco Atom that I started out had a distinct difference between text mode and graphics mode, because, what was text other than graphics, you would think, but it wasn't really like that. The circuitry down low made it much more efficient for computers to work in text mode. So, I cut my teeth in that strange world of text mode first, graphics mode later, and graphics mode being an extravagance, and low res and probably black and white in the first passes. And they went up to 256 colors, and then 16 colors, then 256 colors, then 4096 colors, and then true 24-bit color. And now we don't even talk about 24-bit anymore because there's another 8 bits layered in for alpha level transparency. So things can be transparent to background things without as many calculations going on as you would think, or those types of calculations is deferred to graphics code processors that are, optimized to do that kind of alpha level transparency. Enter the NVIDIA and Radeon type cards and polygons per second and stuff. So everything's very different now. It's excess capacity versus what I learned on. But I didn't become hardcore, so I'm just like one of these average users in an average job, living at the edge of what the tools allow. I'm like, yo, let me use these tools, and they're now up to 4096 colors, I'll use that. It's now up to true color, I'll use that. Oh, but I'm not really a, Herb Lubell and hardcore graphic designer. I'm not going to change the world through my graphics and visuals, and I never saw myself as that talented, and my passion didn't draw me in that direction that much, with a few handfuls of exceptions. I love my logo being reversible, readable upside down. I made a mirrored paper pop-up box magic trick that I have in my drawers to this day. And when video editing became accessible and on the scene, I owned the video toaster. Non-linear editors were the big thing. But as those matured, I realized that really wasn't my thing either. I did the Intel video, I did a few Macromedia Flash projects. But, nothing really, ignited me. Nothing, conceptually, I went to school for engineering to be one of the engineers working on colonies on Mars. Where would I be today? I'd probably be working for Elon Musk today on a Mars colony, prepping that, how it's all going to play out. And these were the things I considered the worthy, endeavors of humankind. That's why I went into mechanical engineering. I was a sci-fi reader back then. It was clear to me people who mastered physical world processes were the most powerful and important people in the world. Chemical engineers first, mechanical engineers second. And so, I grabbed for the brass ring and I missed. I washed out in, Calculus 102 and Physics 101. Part of the washouts. I switched to graphic design. I salvaged what I could. I was in a co-op, I was in a work-study program. Drexel University was famous for its work-study. So I was in a work-study program that I could get down to 4 years from their normal 5 if I switched to graphic design. And then I could keep working for Commodore. So I switched to graphic design and I kept working for Commodore. And I got the best out of it that I could, which was pseudo-friendships that have lasted a lifetime. Lots of interesting perspectives on the world. I met Gerard Bucas, who really opened my eyes as far as what I was doing, controlling people through systems. And then I realized that's what Facebook and everyone was doing, and there were masters in that realm of controlling people through systems, Microsoft. And I wasn't going to be up in those echelons, so that was yet another thing. Even my modest little way of doing it through joyful frameworks got taken over by Ruby on Rails and Python Django, and today whatever JavaScript framework du jour. And there's such churn there, it became the epitome of what I actually disliked, which was the rapid obsolescence of tools that I committed to and put into my muscle memory, that I made part, like extensions of my body. And wow, it took me the longest time to realize that, there's different kinds of smarts in this world, and there's different kinds of dumb in this world, right? Dilbertism, we're all dumb in different ways at different times. And, Ben Franklin-ism, that we can all be geniuses if we just create a genius system or pattern of behavior ethic or code that we live by, right? Genius, average people can be elevated up to, genius, and genius people can live everyday mundane lives because lack of motivation and, I guess that's it, lack of motivation. And so here I am. I never had any of the natural inclinations towards, math abilities, natural motivation or stick-to-itiveness to make my average level abilities that much elevated. And then whenever I did make the attempt, my inner self, my soul, was deeply insulted by the rapidness and almost violence with which my committed to memory, muscle memory, hard-won know-how was trashed, deliberately made obsolete, half because of the inevitable advancements of technology, and half because of deliberate designed obsolescence and the profit projections of companies, quarterly earnings of companies. So, progress won't stop. Things will change. Everything you know will be obsolete in a lifetime or two. But if you play your cards right, everything you know will be obsolete in a lifetime or two. If you don't play your cards right, everything you know and do will be obsolete in 2 to 5 years. And you will find yourself a dinosaur, and you will find yourself doing what Joel Spolsky calls fire in motion, working as hard as you can just to stand still. You will always be relegated to being a lower level technical. So there's lower level technical employee is what I wanted to say. That's basically what I am now, I don't want to be higher level because higher level always implies the management of people. And I am inherently an introvert. No matter how much I can do well in an extroverted world, give it enough time, my proclivity to call stupid people stupid, or to point out the occasional times smart people are stupid, including myself, I am not exempt from this. And to lay out the, broader forces that are at work leading to why things are the way they are generally makes me unloved over the long term. Honesty is not, a extrovert's strongest attribute. So if you really want to know what something is like, ask me and I'll tell you, I'll tell you on almost any front. I'm not political, but I'll tell you on the political front. And, I'm not a particularly qualified on the scientific front, but I'll tell you my thoughts about where things are going with science and quantum mechanics and the deeper meanings of all those things that eventually lead to spooky action at a distance, non-locality, right? People think that's a modern thing with Einstein and quantum entanglement, but it goes back much further. Isaac Newton struggled with the fundamental nature of gravity until Einstein said, that's not really a force between two objects, that's them just rolling towards each other because, space-time is warped. So things going into orbit around each other is things being in perpetual free fall. Really brilliant observations or, hypotheses that became observations and became observed later. The observation of these phenomena, like gravitational lens flare, that kind of thing, proved Einstein out and gave real substance, as it were, to the spooky action at a distance that Newton talked about in the form of gravity. And it was no longer spooky action at a distance for gravity. Now it's spooky action at a distance for information, for particles that can be spinning in two directions at once, that can settle down to a particular spin direction, and when it does, can do so with another particle elsewhere in the universe that had been in contact with it. And great deals of unknowns surrounding whether that was destined to be, and there was something called predeterminism, and there's nothing particularly non-local about it, as Sabine Hofstadter, I get the names completely. I'll get them right, but Sabine, the YouTube physicist, says, or whether there really is something fundamentally different about the 3D stage on which we all exist. Now, relativity, general theory of relativity, would say that there is no 3D stage on which we exist, advocates of it. But I would say, no, that's a wrong reading. There's no absolute 3D stage. But once you have two things near each other, you have a local frame of reference, and you do in fact have a stage. And then there's some strangeness even within that stage. I'm still struggling a bit with internal momentum. When things spin on that stage, it can spin forever for lack of resistance, but it's not true. There's always friction. So internal momentum has a few gotchas. The relationship between, things losing energy. Can things spin forever in a vacuum? Really? Anyway, I digress a little bit, but I'm not qualified enough. I don't conduct the experiments. I don't have the first-hand experiences to make, new hypotheses or authoritative claims. However, one can wrap enough of this stuff in their own awareness of the world to make certain speculations and predictions, and then codes of behaviors that arise from those speculations and predictions. Self-similarity comes into there a lot, fractal-based self-similarity can tell us that consciousness is really just something that is constructed as an object in a somewhat similar way as everything else, which means there's a smaller design. There's a design expressed in some smaller form, from which you might not even recognize the larger form. You should play with fractal artwork programs and see how these wonderful Mandelbrot looking and broccoli beautiful complex shapes that seem like they're designed arise from out of very simple shapes, lines, vector quantities, that type of thing. So it's tempting to think that human consciousness and sentience of all life forms, whenever anything becomes aware, self-awareness, or even the proto-awareness that precedes that in being able to abide by life programs that hit the check marks of self-replication and eating and taking measures to ensure self-survival. All those things that we attribute to life, be it plant life, bacterial life, fungi, slime, mold. It hits a few check marks. And somewhere in there is a fractal pattern, the expression of life and ultimately sentience in some smaller form, in the genetics of DNA and molecules, and somewhere, I don't know, but it unfolds or folds, right? You could look at it as folding through protein folding, or you could look at it as an unfolding, like a blossoming of a flower, to reveal a thing capable of, driving a Jeep Wrangler along a highway, holding a job, pushing things that they have to do responsibility-wise early in the morning or late at night, and making all the people who you're interrelated with, who help you convert your your abilities, your internalized abilities, your tool-using abilities, into economic product, right? What do I do other than push bits around like so many other people under so many other scenarios and situations and circumstances? We're all just pushing bits around. So sometimes you push bits around like Elon Musk and have profound impact on the world in the modern day during your lifetime. Same with Isaac Newton, pushing bits around as a bit pusher. And same with Einstein, same with Copernicus and Galileo and Democritus. And going back through the whole history and tradition of science, unraveling the bits, the mysteries of the bits and their behaviors. So we just entered a world, within my lifetime, the progress is phenomenal and amazing. And every generation criticizes the generation that comes after it for missing important stuff, like handwriting's gone. I don't care. Stick shift driving is gone. No big deal. Now the ability to drive going away. Oh my God. Under the rule of mega corporations whose larger systems are required for you to maintain the capability of driving, now I start to have concerns. Now I start to have real reservations, even with my own kid who I watch growing up, being homeschooled. And when I bring up things about the world that one should know, the response being anger, quick to anger. The broad sweeping things that I feel, most people should know, that there are two rules of, understanding the world that are generally in play, that make very accurate predictions, mathematically speaking, which is part of the trigger, right? So you got your general relativity, which talks about things at the very big, and particularly things orbiting each other, right? Things moving towards each other at a very large scale. Us being held to the surface of the planet, when that force at a large scale interacts with that force at a much smaller scale. How we as human beings are right in between, right stuck at the vibrating edge between that very large general relativity view of the world and way to make predictions, and the other big way of viewing the world, which is a small way of viewing the world, which also makes very accurate predictions, and we were not even aware was a thing until recently, and that is, of course, quantum theory and quantum mechanics. And how, how none of them are the pure results of any single person's work. They all worked off of other people. Those who talk about Einstein like to sometimes draw the picture of him working in isolation, writing his first 3 and then 5 seminal papers in his young years as 28 years old and as a patent clerk in Germany. And they like to say how so much of his novel ideas came from being, isolated and not exposed to traditional science, because he wasn't a traditional scientist at the time. He was a a patent clerk with aspirations to be like a math teacher. And he did work off of the work of other people who could have easily also led to the concepts of relativity. He got there first. He was in a race with someone else. I'll get all these other names down. But it was within a single person's ability to hold these thoughts in one's head. Even though they used the work of prior people, it was not so extensively that it could not have it been invented from scratch in one's own mind. The whole totality, the beauty of general relativity is lower resolution, shall we say, than quantum mechanics, which build on the works of one person after another person after another person. Maxwell Planck noticed how energy of electrons got quantized, how things seem to come in discrete bundles or, particles, when everyone was thinking it was waves, because there's two Maxwells of light. These are the things that I think are such fascinating stories. One from the 1800s, and then one from the 1900s. So James Clerk Maxwell worked with a wonderful experimentalist who played with magnets, Michael Faraday, and the two of these folks together showed how light and electromagnetism and radio waves and all that stuff were all really the same thing, and they were waves. And the Maxwell equations are taught to this day. Extremely accurate, extremely predictive, and promote a certain way of viewing the world as all energy-like things comprised of waves, built from waves, continuous in nature, and rippling like the surface of water. And while that is 100% true, it got further qualified by Einstein, who said, hey, look, when it changes the electrical properties by shining onto the surface of metal, it does it in this quantized way, this bundled up way, and that the observations of James Clerk Maxwell actually tell us that that it gets chunked in the way that this other Maxwell Planck had shown us. So James Clerk Maxwell, continuous waves, built on the work of Michael Faraday. So Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell, you have to view as almost the two together. One of the Maxwells of light had a buddy. This was in the 1800s. Enter the 1900s, and Max Planck going, oh, well, when light shines off of black bodies, the way it radiates off the energy, the way it goes through the different colors of, orange hot to red hot, and then black again as it cools down, this does not follow any known predictions. This is a strange curve whose formula behind it is unknown. There were a few attempts at it, and Max Planck unifies these attempts and says, oh, so you just have to look at things in these bundled up quantas. And he didn't realize he started the quantum revolution, but Einstein realized he started the quantum revolution. And then Niels Bohr, and I forget all these other names, but all these other people jumped onto the bandwagon, fleshing out this and that, the Pauli principle, exclusionary principle. Two electrons can't be in the same place at the same. So it started layering on with all the gang of quantum, and there was the two waves of the gang of quantum. There was the gang of quantum leading into into and during World War II, right? That work led to the atomic bomb. And then there was the gang of quantum immediately following World War II that did another round of breakthroughs with field theory, virtual particles, Lamb shift, and the Casimir effect, and all the things that have barely really even trickled into public consciousness today. Non-locality, I guess, would be sprinkled in there. Oh, you can hardly not mention the two slits experiment that was first observed not long after Rutherford, who realized that atoms had a hard center core. So Rutherford sent certain types of radiation through atoms in gold foil and said sometimes it knocked off of something in the center, surprisingly. So atoms had this, hard core center. Following on Rutherford, oh my God, I got to get these names down. John White, perhaps it was, but it was the two slits experiment going, not only do atoms have that kind of shape, but light can interfere with itself when going through a narrow slit. And even if you send photons through one at a time, light, single atoms of light, single photons of light, single particles of light can interfere with itself. So that undoes Einstein's, first piezoelectric paper that says quantum. So James Clerk Maxwell says, all electromagnetism, including light and electrons, are waves. And then Max Planck says, no, they got to get bundled up in these quantums, but it's just a illusion, a trick of numbers. And then Einstein says, no, not a trick of numbers. They really do get bundled up like that, and the piezoelectric effect tells us that. So light energy is back to particles, and two slits experiment shows, well, it's still actually wave part of the time. And then big boom of the atomic bomb and energy. And then the second gang of quantum, I got to get down the names of the, when they all got together, but they all got together not long after World War II. And the second gang of quantum can be greatly characterized by Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was the young person who was looking around at all these great people of the first wave of quantum, John Wheeler and stuff, going, I can't believe I'm amongst these geniuses. However, they haven't figured it all out, and that's when stuff like, Lamb shift of the magnetic moment of the electron, when magnetic properties are actually noticeable by the movement of electrons. So electrons moving through metal creates a magnetic field, and measuring things about the details of that, when it precisely happens, the weights of things involved, you can come up with something called the magnetic moment of the electron. And it's a measurable quantity. It's one of the constants of the universe, and it should be exactly a certain number, right? Predictions say it should be exactly a certain number. And experiment after experiment, observation after observation, even though it happens at such a tiny scale as to be unobservable, its effect is felt in the real world in various ways. And one of them is the Lamb shift. There's experiments that show the actual calculated value of that world constant. I forget the letter that gets used for it, but just like C gets used for the speed of light, another symbol gets used for the electron's magnetic moments. And it's not what it should be. And that combines together with the Casimir effect, which also shows that if Lamb shift is true, then there should be the equivalent of aeronautic lift. So you know how an airplane wing moving through mass, a special airplane wing shape creates lift. So if you can have X amount of Y of power, you can create Y amount of lift. And that was the breakthrough the Wright brothers had in their wind tunnels, where they knew flight was assured. There was the aha moment of flight being assured when these ratios worked out. That has happened in the quantum realm. That's the Casimir effect. It's demonstratable. It's experimentally provable. And so there's rippling quantum fields all around us. It does not undo Einstein's special theory of relativity, which does away with fixed frames of reference, but it does raise questions about fixed frames of reference. What are these invisible rippling quantum fields that account for the duality of particles? Particles can be waves, waves can be particles, because all particles, virtual or not, are the manifestation of rippling waves, something somewhere, that poke through some sort of quantized threshold and enter our world. When they do it briefly, we call it virtual particles. When they do it with persistence, we call them particles. Truth is that all particles are virtual in nature, borrowing energy from places unknown to have a lifetime in our world. But they've overcome some sort of threshold or mass limit or something, I don't know what, where they're not the ones that pop in and out of existence like virtual photons at the Planck scale. 1 Planck unit long for 1 Planck unit duration of time. They almost never will be observed or measurable by humans at a human scale. These are things that exist beyond the beyond the beyond of small, and we only know they exist is because they happen collectively in mass at such a quantity that their collective effects are observable at the human scale. Just like magnets, pole to pole, north to north or south to south, magnets will repel each other because of some magical seeming cushiony force field. We've all had that experience and wonder at that. All that is the effects that comprise our universe that are all around us anyway, being observable, detectable at a human scale, because these, microscopic regions of matter are all aligned or pointed in the same direction, magnetic field. The miracle of magnets and, that repelling that you feel pole to pole is not a miracle of magnets. It's a miracle of human discretionary observation. There is actually a way to filter what it is we observe about the world sufficiently that sometimes we see nothing miraculous, mere water tension, mere things holding themselves together, mere stickiness and smoothness, ordinary things. And sometimes we see miraculous things, like an invisible force field that keeps these two objects from being pressed entirely, against each other. But even that you can overcome. You can touch them. Magnets pole to pole. They can reach each other. How much different would the world be if, when you put magnets pole to pole, that their repulsive force was so strong that a human being, no matter their strength, could not bring them together to touch? How much different would the world be? How much more miraculous would force fields seem? But we don't live in that world. We live in this world where everything is just fine-tuned so that the human state of existence can, through new normals, through the daily grind, through the repetition of the daily wake-sleep cycle and the process of learning, come to seem boring and mundane and non-wondrous and non-extraordinary. You hear Richard Feynman, one of the great scientists of the second gang of quantum, the second quantum revolution, the ones who discovered virtual particles, terrible name, the rippling field of that builds everything is what we should call it. The stage upon which what the stage is built out of becomes the stage occasionally. Time and space are the same thing. A lot of stuff we try to separate, you can't really separate. As things crush down to the state that they were at the moment of creation of the Big Bang, the more the energy of gravity gets close to the energy of electromagnetism and the strong and the weak, there's nuclear force, until such a tiny scale at which they must, out of common sense, combine into a single unified force. We know through thought experiments that it should be that way. We don't know for sure, but we strongly think that. We strongly suspect that. Anywho, I'm getting close to home, and I'm gonna have to wrap up pretty soon. And I did it successfully. It's barely even 9:30, and I did this round trip, and I'm not shifting my workday too much later. 10 a.m. start, 7 p.m. stop. 9 to 5, I wish, right? But things have really changed in the case of lockdown. So much of the 9 to 5 day, how much of that was lost to the commute that isn't anymore from that portion of humanity that has evolved to take advantage of its digital nervous system and get rid of the 13% of your life that's going to be lost on the commute, which has worse ramifications than simply losing a double-digit percentage of your time. It helps contribute to the daily grind and to remove the wonder and to remove the love-worthiness of things. So, by the internet happening, by Google and Apple happening, and by teleconferencing happening, by look at how fast it went from we don't have video phones or flying cars to we have video phones, ubiquitous video phones, and video conferencing is now everywhere and everything, to the point where you don't have to even drive to work anymore in a lot of cases. And flying cars went from not a thing to, it's just how you label it, folks. Whoever thinks we don't have flying cars gets stuck on labels. What we don't have is the law and the legislature and the safety to allow it to be a practical part of our everyday existence. But there's unlimited paths to flight now, unlimited paths to buoyancy and safety in the air, unlimited paths to safety in the air. And it's just getting the weighting right of how much buoyancy tech, how much lift through airplane wing technology, and how much of factor X, which I believe exists in the labs, right? As fast as the gang of Quantum 2, right? The second quantum revolution in that, Long Island, New York conference they had after World War II. They had anti-gravity. There's no doubt about it. There's looking at the Casimir force and the ramifications of that. Anti-gravity tech entered TR1, Technological Readiness 1. The theories existed. But I won't turn this into a video about that. Maybe we don't really have anti-gravity and we're just tackling those things now. That will make it possible, like sustained fusion, right? Fusion will make anti-gravity possible because now you'll have strong enough fields to polarize, that quantum field. When you polarize the particles that are popping into existence, as short-lived as they are, when you polarize them en masse at an observable scale, you now have a magnet floating in midair that exists as one of your 2 points of, points of reference, right? It doesn't matter whether quantum fields abide by or violate special relativity or general relativity. as an absolute coordinate system, because it doesn't matter. Once you have 2 local points of reference, it's all you need for things like anti-gravity. One point of reference is your local quantum field that can be polarized under the influence of a profoundly powerful electromagnetic field. It's just all your polar regions of these virtual photons and others that come into existence in that field all point the same way as fast as they pop into existence and as fast as they go away. So there's a floating magnet in the air. But the thing that creates that floating magnet in the air has its own point of reference almost by another system within the gravity field. No, this person is going to try to be a bastard. You gotta be a defensive driver. You can't allow people to walk all over you. That brings it full circle, doesn't it? Learn to drive. The generation who falls prey to not learning to drive because auto-driving cars are a generation of sheep being led to slaughter. Simple as that. Learn to drive, make it one of your basic skills. Driving is not cursive. Driving is not laced shoelaces. Driving is human free will. Anyhow, that's about all I have to say about that. And I think that anyone following along with me, I don't know, if you're one of my fans, one of my watchers, where this is all leading, you can't tackle something too big. You have to tackle smaller things and then incorporate them into your life bit by bit and prevent the daily grind from driving the wonder out of life. And we can't all be, right? If I really were to look at where I would have liked to have been if I were one of these profoundly, amazing, world-changing people, I'd probably cast myself into the place of Michael Faraday or James Clerk Maxwell. I think those were the ones who created the world-changing science, the predictability of it all, the modern world, and moved us in positive directions. They allowed the communication, the radio waves, right? Light is radio waves, and so there should be the ability to detect this stuff. There should be the ability to use this stuff in creative ways for communication, Morse code, and then eventually radio and TV, and now the internet. It's all radio waves one way or another. And then I'll be taking another step real soon from radio waves to whatever is possible under quantum. A certain amount of predictions are going to be possible in the same way new physical devices like radios became possible. New physical devices based on quantum are becoming possible. That's kind of out of the reach of a humble little person like me. So, internalize tools that are becoming the new lingua franca of tech. Internalize your Linux, internalize your Python, internalize your Vim, and internalize your Git, and you will be able to work profoundly cool magic. And now it's time to reward myself with a breakfast at a diner where I will do work, studying some of the things that I have to know for some of my projects coming up. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.